Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. I have another rejoinder for the Rabbi Tovia Singer, one of the foremost Jewish commentators out on the YouTube. Let me just say up front, I think he is a fantastic teacher when he shares his incredible knowledge about Judaism and the Hebrew Bible. When he begins to talk about the Christians, his bias warps his view, and that's unfortunate. Every time he starts talking about the Christians being criminals, the Christians changing the scripture, the Christians damaged this, they damaged that, they raped the Bible, whatever he says about the Christians, my sincere advice is you put on your critical thinking cap and really stop and think about what he's saying, because I haven't found him accurate yet in any time he is critiquing things. Why are the problems with the Bible? He's always blaming the Christians. And it seems to me like most of the times he does, he's not just wrong. And this is so unfortunate, I have to put it this way, but he's stupidly wrong. Allow me to do a rejoinder, a BYP response to Rabbi Tovia Singer. I'm going to use Dr. Michael Brown's materials, and I am going to use Golan Broshi and Seth Postel of One for Israel and a few of their ideas. I'm not going to exhaust this. We're going to be talking about Isaiah 9, 5, and 6. I believe in Hebrew it's 6 and 7. I might have that backwards. But anyway, it's about a messianic prophecy about Jesus. Let's see where the problem lies. That's what we want to find out.
To say. This is called theological acrobatics, meaning the church had to change this passage violently in order to get the result that it wanted.
Yeah, and not only did they have to change it violently, according to Rabbi Singer, it was done quite intentionally to trick you, obviously because you can't read Hebrew if you're reading the English, so it's done to trick you, like a Las Vegas magic show, here in his own words.
And we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, whenever Rabbi Singer talks about the church or Christianity or even the New Testament or Paul, oh my goodness, or Jesus, as far as that goes, he really overdoes it, unfortunately, with incorrect information, and he's no different here. Let's keep watching.
I'm using strong words, but it is a crime to change the word of God. And incidentally, every Christian would agree that if what I'm saying is true, then this is a crime.
It was a fraud. Okay, it's a crime, but the scripture has been changed through the millennia by both peoples, Christians and Jews. So both of you groups are criminals. Where does that leave us? Now what, right? It's unfortunate that this issue has become so polarized, politicized, and polemicized because it ends up being a fight instead of a discussion.
Reading the English, so it's done to trick you, like a Las Vegas magic show, here in his own words.
You're going, what's going on here? Well, the answer is, it's like going to Las Vegas and watching a magic show. And you're wondering, how did they cut that? How do they saw that lady in half, divide the two parts, and the feet are still jumping here, and she's there, and then they put it together, and then she jumps out? Well, that's what this is. Okay, this is a magic show you'd see at the Venetian on the Vegas Strip.
All right, so in his mind, this is something done very intentionally with evil intent. In other words, the Christian translators are intentionally deceiving the readers. They know the Hebrew says this, but they're telling you it says the opposite so they can turn this into a messianic prophecy. We'll let him expand on it one more time.
All right, let's go. The way this was done, okay, so this is how, like I'm showing how they saw the lady in half, is that all the verbs in this passage have been changed from the what's called the perfect tense into the future tense. That's how this was done, which means that if we're going to go through the Hebrew in a moment, and I'm going to teach you, if you're a Christian, a lot is at stake. I'm going to show you how you can check it out yourself, because it's very important to me that you don't take my word for it. That's how Jews are. We don't want you to take a word for it. We want you to look it up yourself. But you say, Rabbi, how am I going to look it up?
Exactly. And I took his advice. I also went on the hunt. I researched. I went to my Hebrew Bible. I went to my Greek Bible. I went to other scholars who are vastly more in-depth in the Hebrew and the Greek than I am. And I've just selected just Michael Brown and just one for Israel. And there are multitudinous others out there in YouTube land that can show you. And this discussion goes far beyond just the verb tenses. I'm only focusing in my Backyard Professor Responds video here to the verb tenses issue that Rabbi Singer brings up. He also brings up other arguments, and in later videos, I will address those. But for now, as I began to study, especially in Gesenius's Hebrew grammar, I have a sincerely hard time thinking that Rabbi Singer, as great an Orthodox rabbi and knowledgeable of Hebrew that he is, I have a very hard time not believing that he's not familiar with this source. Jews and Christians alike are still utilizing this, even though it's much older. That's true. Now, I can understand if he hasn't seen this source, Hebrew for Theologians, by Jacques Bedoukan. I get that. Even he has a response that I will read a little later. So, to me, it's so obvious that his anti-Christian bias, unfortunately, really distorts his view, and it makes him blatantly wrong about the Hebrew. And this is why I chose to respond, because if you keep getting things wrong about the Hebrew, of which you are the expert, but there's other experts, then how can I believe anything else you say, Rabbi Tovia Singer? That's how big this issue becomes. I'm treating you exactly like I'm treating the Mormon leadership, from which religious tradition I have lost faith in now due to their biases against whatever and them manipulating the information. I'm finding, unfortunately, you are doing the same thing, and that's why I'm responding.
It's a messianic prophecy.
Or why would we say it's about Jesus if the New Testament
Exactly.
never says it's about Jesus?
So let's start with objection number one, make it really simple. All the verbs are in the past tense.
Okay.
So what's the big deal?
Yes, so basically, those who try to refute the Christian interpretation of this passage, they would argue that the New Testament, the English translations of this passage are completely wrong. Not only they're wrong, they're deceptive, they're misleading, right? So in the Christian translation, for instance, New American Standard, for a child will be born to us. You know, a son will be given to us. The government will rest upon his shoulders. His name will be called, right? So basically, this whole notion that this is in the future, the problem is anybody who can read the Hebrew would understand that all these verbs are in the past tense.
Exactly.
So it doesn't say a child will be born to us. It says a child has been born to us. A son has been given to us. The authority has settled on his shoulders. He has been named, right? And so the thought that this passage is a future prophecy is just simply a misreading of the actual Hebrew text. That's
Yep.
the objection.
So what's our response to that argument?
And I'll get to that response in a moment. I just want to make it clear these gentlemen from One for Israel are Messianic Jews. They are still Jews. They just believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and they have accepted the New Testament information as well. And so they are approaching the Old Testament from that perspective because they have recognized that the Messianic prophecies in the Hebrew Old Testament do in fact point to Jesus. Also, Michael Brown is in this same category as a Messianic Jew. These gentlemen, especially Golan Broshi, are serious scholars of the Hebrew. And so there are always two sides to the coin. What astounds me is that Rabbi Tovia Singer doesn't even hint that there's a way out of this dilemma, when in point of fact, there is. These gentlemen that I'm using to respond to Tovia Singer, as well as my own response that I'll get to, are presenting his point of view fairly with the answer. Tovia Singer's bias is so strong that he can't do that in his own mind. And that's disappointing. Let's keep going.
That's how Jews are. We don't want you to take a word for it. We want you to look it up yourself. When you say, Rabbi, how am I going to look it up?
Well, what he says there is accurate. No, not in terms of the intent of the Christians. That's easily explained in the Christian translations, which we'll get to in a moment. But yes, the Hebrew, if you just translate it straight, is in the past. Ki yeled yulad lanu ben nitan lanu. So, for example, let's put it up with the New Jewish Publication Society translation side by side. For a child has been born to us, so past tense, a son has been given us, and authority has settled on his shoulders. He has been named, and now we'll come back to that. They translate it one way: the mighty God is plain and grace, the eternal Father, peaceable ruler. That's an unusual translation, suggested that's not known in the history of Jewish interpretation. Rabbi Singer has another take. We'll come back to that in a moment. But yes, anyone that knows Hebrew decently knows that those verbs there are, you would say, in the past tense if we're using English grammatical terms. So why do most Christian translations say a child is born or a child will be born? I'll explain that in a minute. But one more quote from Tovia so that you can see from Rabbi Singer how strongly he feels about this point.
And I put these out of order. It was that previous one that I said, yes, I took your challenge and I researched it. That's the next clip. So I kind of took it out of. So let's keep going here. It's getting fascinating.
To that argument?
So the bottom line is that the argument, one well-known apologist basically argues all the verbs are in the perfect tense, the past tense, okay? But the argument actually treats biblical Hebrew as if it's Latin or Greek. In other words, it's an interpretation that actually is not reading biblical Hebrew and treating biblical Hebrew on its own terms.
Exactly. And we have a quote by a
Now, that was an insight I was very anxious to share here. Now, that is really important, and I do have another clip where they will quote an Israeli scholar, a rabbi who thinks this passage is messianic, to that same effect. This is the downside of trying to argue against the future, the prophecy of the Messiah in this verse, is they say, no, you can't translate it that way. You're applying a completely different language's syntax and grammar onto the Hebrew, and the Hebrew has its own way of working with the tenses. I think that's a key argument. Let's keep going.
Because translators understood this as what is called the prophetic perfect, meaning that the prophet sees a future event as if it's already past. That a prophet speaks of something in the future as if it's already happened, hence uses past tense language, speaking about a future event. Because many Christian translators see this as a prophecy of the birth of the Messiah. Therefore, they say this is the prophetic perfect. The prophet sees it as if it already happened. Now, I agree with Rabbi Singer. It's better to translate as it is, and then we can interpret it as prophetic perfect. In other words, translate it as a child has been born. And I believe in context, that's what it's talking about. A child has been born that with messianic expectations who does not live up to them. Hence, we see this as a messianic prophecy. But the translators weren't trying to pull the wool over your eyes. They just understood that as prophetic perfect. You say that's bogus.
Now, this is critically important because if you're not familiar with the Hebrew at all, you really do think, oh, come on, you guys are really pulling desperately here. You're just pulling a rabbit out of your hat. That's not true. Very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and give my response here now because I've got a couple more good clips. This is out of Jacques B. Ducan, The Hebrew for Theologians. And let me see. Yeah, right here, page 206 and 207. I got to read this. So the principle is used by the prophets who may base their predictions of a future event on the reference to a past event. The past event of creation will be reactualized in the Exodus, Exodus 15:8, or in the return from the exile. That's Isaiah 42, 5 and 9. So 5 through 9. So the past event of the Exodus will be reactualized in the return from the exile, is how Jeremiah 31, 1 through 8 describes it. The past event of the return from the exile will be reactualized in the final salvation, as Ezekiel 37, 21 through 28 describes it. The more specific battle of Jezreel of the past, described in 2 Kings 10, verse 11, will be reactualized in another future battle, according to Hosea 1, 4, and verse 11. This phenomenon of actualization is even attested on the linguistic level through the use of the perfectum propheticum. Notice this is within the Hebrew culture anciently. That's what this gentleman is pointing out. This is not a modern Christian way to try to squeeze out a fake prophecy in order to justify their doctrine using the Old Testament. That's not at all what they're doing. They are, even in the New Testament, they are Jews living within their Judaic culture and philosophy and prophecy and religion. That's what is being pointed out here. So in Jeremiah 32, 37 through 44, for instance, the perfect tense of the verbs in these scriptures is used to express the certainty of the hope of the restoration. This future event is so sure that it is perceived as if it were already accomplished. In most versions, it has been significantly rendered by a future. And then in Gesenius's Hebrew grammar, again, amazingly how well this book has aged for grammar. I mean, it's approaching 200 years old, and it is still one of the standard texts. The exquisite detail of this is absolutely phenomenal. It's just amazing. You see it referenced by biblical scholars fairly often, still to this day. I'm going to give you the page numbers. The way you do reference it in the Gesenius is with the paragraphs. And that makes it much more harder to find. So I've kind of made my own index, and then I've done my own number system. So for those of you who do have this, it's going to be pages 312 and 313. And what he says is he gives examples to express facts which are undoubtedly imminent, and therefore in the imagination of the speaker, they've already been accomplished. This is the perfectum confidentiae. And he gives several scriptures: Numbers 17:27, Genesis 30:13, Isaiah 6:5, Proverbs 4:2, even in interrogative sentences in Genesis 18:12, Numbers 17:38, Numbers 23:10, Judges 9:9 through 11, Zechariah 4:10, Proverbs 22:20. He really puts a mountain of material into this. This use of the perfect verb here occurs most frequently in prophetic language. It's called the perfectum propheticum. The prophet so transports himself in imagination into the future that he describes the future event as if it had already been seen or heard by him. And he gives the reference of Isaiah 5:13. Therefore, my people are gone into captivity. And the perfect is the Nala, the Hebrew. And then he shows all kinds of other scriptures. Isaiah 9:1 following, Isaiah 10:28, Isaiah 11:9, Isaiah 19:7, Job 5:20, 2 Chronicles 20:37, etc. And you can look these up at your own time. Not infrequently, the imperfect interchanges with such perfects, either in the parallel member or further on in the narrative. Two very good sources showing that this isn't just an invention in order to get one up on the apostate Jews. That is absolutely irrelevant. This is basically utilizing the grammar and syntax of the ancient Hebrew as the ancient Hebrews themselves used it in order to come to a better understanding of the prophecies. That's what this response is all about. I have a very hard time thinking Rabbi Tovia Singer doesn't know this about the Hebrew. In fact, I'm willing to bet that he does, and he should have the character to at least acknowledge that this is a possibility, yet he refuses to. Let's keep going. I've got a couple more clips.
He basically argues, and correctly, that the whole notion of talking about perfect verbs in biblical Hebrew or imperfect verbs in biblical Hebrew is just simply forcing Latin categories on ancient Near Eastern texts. So this is his quote: "It is now widely recognized that biblical Hebrew cannot or should not be pressed into the linguistic mold of Greek and Latin. As any other human language, Hebrew has its own distinct grammar and syntax." And so the whole notion that you can refute the messianic interpretation of this verse because all the verbs are in the perfect is actually kind of a demonstration that it's actually an argument that's not rooted in biblical Hebrew at all. It claims to be reading the biblical Hebrew, but it's using Latin and Greek categories that don't exist in biblical Hebrew.
Yeah.
But even if, let's assume.
A very, very critical point to anyone who argues that the Christians are attempting to misuse the Bible or to change it up in order to justify their own doctrines, etc. That's simply not true. They're simply utilizing the ancient Hebrew in all of its syntax and grammar to get a better grasp of the actual meaning. And finally, one last clip.
And see how they understand this passage.
He's talking about the Jewish traditions now. So the accusation Singer brings out is the Christians have raped the Bible, or they have really deceived us in changing the Bible. But wait, even in Rabbi Singer's own rabbinic honored, time-honored Jewish tradition, even those rabbis accept this theme. Very interesting. Why didn't Rabbi Singer bring that out?
Let's look first at the Targum. All right. So let's look at Targum Jonathan, and beginning with the words Chazite v'lo an, Sechite v'lo yitoi kariv. So I have seen him, but he's not here now. I have looked at him, but he is not near. And then it says this, Chad yukum malcha miYaakov. When the king arises from Jacob, future. The Hebrew darach, which is past, is translated with the Aramaic yukum, future. V'yitrabah. And when he's anointed, future. And what does the Targum say? It's about the Messiah. Here, I'll read an English translation of the Targum. I've seen him, but he's not here now. I've looked at him, but he's not near. When the king arises from Jacob and the Messiah of Israel is anointed, he will slay the nobles of Moab and will rule over all mankind.
There it is. Even the Targums, the Aramaic translations. Now they show this translating of a perfect verb, meaning it has passed. They even translate it into the future and then say this is about the Messiah. It is a messianic prophecy. Even the rabbis say that. So the long story short, to twit the Christians for doing something criminal or illegal when your own tradition does it, and when your own tradition is just following the actual basis of how the Hebrew language works and how the culture utilized it throughout the millennia, is a little bit of a desperately ridiculous argument. And I'm honestly just not persuaded by Rabbi Tovia Singer's argument.